Can I ask you about North Korea?
Yes.
I think over the weekend, they have threatened thousands of times greater punishment on the U.S. if there's any sort of move against them for the Sony attack, including attacks on the White House and the Pentagon. I was wondering if I could get a response to that, and also if you could comment on reports that they have lost internet access and maybe under attack.
Well, on the first question, obviously we take very seriously any threats to U.S. citizens, to U.S. companies, regardless of what that threat looks like. We're obviously aware of these recent reports. At this time, we have no specific credible threat information that leads credence to these reports. But obviously, law enforcement, Homeland Security officials are continuing to monitor the situation and would closely follow any leads they may get, provide appropriate guidance to anyone, individuals or entities that may be at risk. We do urge North Korea to exercise restraint, to refrain from further threatening actions at this time. Obviously, we've talked about this a lot in the last few days, but that's what we're focused on right now. In terms of your second question, as the President said, we are considering a range of options in response. We aren't going to discuss, publicly operational details about the possible response options or comment on those kind of reports in any way, except to say that as we implement our responses, some will be seen, some may not be seen. So I can't confirm those reports, but in general, that's what the President has spoken to. Yes, Pam.
A follow-up on North Korea. Also, over the weekend, the government urged the United States to apologize for linking it to the Sony attacks. Any reaction to that call?
Well, as the FBI and the President and everyone has now made clear, we are confident the North Korean government is responsible for this destructive attack. We stand by this conclusion. The government of North Korea has a long history of denying responsibility for destructive and provocative actions, and if they want to help here, they can admit their culpability and compensate Sony for the damages that they caused. Do you want to follow up?
Yeah. You're calling on the North Korean government to compensate Sony?
Well, over the weekend they said a number of things, including what Pam referenced, but also talking about a joint investigation. And yes, if they want to help here, as they indicated over the weekend they did, then they could admit their culpability and compensate Sony for the damages this attack caused.
Okay, and you also said that the North Koreans have a long history of covering up?
Of denying responsibility for destructive and provocative actions. That's obviously not just cyber-related, other actions as well.
How would you rank the U.S. record on that?
I don't think there's any comparison at all.
Has not the United States government denied responsibility for things that it ultimately admitted to?
I don't think there's any comparisons to anything the U.S. government does and anything the North Korean government does, period. So if you have a more specific question, I'm happy to entertain that, but a broad comparison is just not warranted.
Well, I mean, for years and years and years, you denied, and there was a denial of any role in the coup in Iran in 1953, for example. I'm just saying.
An episode about which we've been very open and public and discussed
recently, but not that.
history.
But it took 40 years for that to happen.
Look, I will put our record of discussing our history and our past up against any other countries on the planet, particularly North Korea's. Yes. You have to turn on your microphone. Is there anything else on North Korea? Okay, let's finish North Korea.
Can you talk about your consultations with the six-party talks about the hacking incident?
What consultation specifically? The Secretary spoke with his Chinese counterpart over the weekend, I believe, on December 21st, to talk about a range of issues, including the recent cyber attacks on Sony Pictures. We have discussed this issue with China specifically in order to share information, express our concerns about the attack, and ask for its cooperation. That's a conversation that will be ongoing.
Has the history between the U.S. and China on cybersecurity, like considering that the U.S. indicted 5 Chinese hackers this year, has that led to any contentious discussions with China?
Well, I would separate a few issues out. First, as the President said, we have no evidence that any other government was involved here, and that includes the Chinese government. But look, we share a concern about cyber incidents. We raise them with China when we have a concern, but this is an area where, again, the Secretary and others have asked for China's cooperation. Obviously, despite our differences, I would say, on this or other issues, we have affirmed that malicious cyber activity like this attack can pose a risk to international peace and security, so we'll keep having the conversation with them.
Do you have any thoughts about the fact that Chinese servers may have been used in this attack?
I know there's an investigation ongoing and don't have any confirmation on those kinds of details. I know there's a lot of rumors out there, but again, no information, no evidence that any other government was involved here at this time.
Just one more from me. do you have any comments on their decision to skip the Security Council meeting this morning? Or today?
The North Koreans.
Yes.
Switching gears here. Yes, just a couple words on that. Today's Security Council meeting is a historic one, I would say. For the first time, the situation in North Korea, the human rights situation, will be a standalone agenda item in the Security Council. I think it's at 3 p.m. today. This is a significant step. It will ensure continued Council attention to the human rights situation moving forward and demonstrates really the concern of the international community. I guess I'd say I'm not surprised that North Korea would seek to avoid scrutiny of, I think, what anyone would call an atrocious human rights record. They've been doing so for years. The DPRK's heightened diplomatic activity both in New York and around the globe, I think, to avoid an examination of this record is pretty telling, and I think probably speaks for itself. But we're looking forward to the session this afternoon. We think it's an important step forward. Anything else on North Korea? Okay, let's move on.
Sorry, I need to go back to North Korea for a second. On Friday, we had talked about, or with Jen, had talked about the State Sponsors of Terrorism Act, and then the president in this
President spoke to
interview that was done
Sunday.
Friday but aired on Sunday said that, yeah, you're considering it. I had asked on Friday what the practical punitive impact of putting them back on the list would be, considering what I believe to be the fact that when they were taken off the list, they didn't actually get any sanctions relief
So
for
it's
it.
an excellent question that I've been talking to our team about this morning to get a little clarity on when they were taken off, whether any sanctions came off with that, or because they're among the most sanctioned country in the world, all of those provisions remained. I don't have a clear answer yet on exactly what the specifics of that are, so let me see if I can go back to our team. But suffice to say, I mean, they are among the most sanctioned countries in the world.
Well, exactly.
But there are certain sanctions
No, but there are
provisions that go along with state sponsors of terrorism. I don't know if
But-
those provisions remained on for other things.
Right.
So
So
I'm-
my question is basically, if you put them back on, would it be anything more than a symbolic move, like you're on the
Right.
list of bad guys now?
I understand the question, and I
And
will
secondly, as you
endeavor
say,
to get you an answer.
as you say, North Korea is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world, and it's pretty hard for it to be involved in any kind of legitimate, at least, international finance or commerce. So with that in mind, I'm wondering how much thought was given to the response, put in your response before that North Korea should pay compensation to Sony.
Well, that's
How
just
could
one
how
piece
could
of-
North Korea how could Sony legally accept compensation from North Korea? Is there an exception in the
I'm happy to check with our attorneys.
Would you? Because I mean, as far as I know, if you're getting a payment, a direct payment from the North Korean government, you're breaking the law.
I'm happy to check with our attorneys. I'm sure we could probably find some exception to make in this case. I was broadly making the point that North Korea's offer this weekend to, quote, help with the investigation was probably a little bit misplaced, and there are things they could do to better assist, including admitting their culpability
And pay compensation.
and paying compensation, yes.
And what do you have in mind for that compensation? Would that be like actors' salaries?
I don't
things
have
like
more
that?
specifics for you than that. But I'm happy to check with our legal folks, and I will try to get you a question or an answer on the sanctions question.
Thank you.